heading off to fight the Kaiser. Well done, mums and dads. Your fine Kiwi lads are sure to do us proud. In the year 1911, Lieutenant Colonel William Malone of Taranaki Rifles created a small piece of military history when he encouraged his men to take their military-issue hats, punch them up the middle and squeeze the sides, thus creating this, the lemon squeezer hat as it's commonly known. But considering Malone's inspiration was this beautiful mountain on the North Island's west coast, wouldn't the Taranaki hat have been a bit more evocative than the lemon squeezer? A bit daft, doesn't it? I'm on a cross-country pilgrimage.
Come on, Marco, come on.
The Anzac spirit was born on the beaches of Gallipoli, and all your wartime deeds since then have created a century of rich and fascinating history. When my walk finishes, our inspiring new community roadshow begins.
Hello, Fremantle!
Join families telling me their stories, showing off their keepsakes, sharing their memories.
Thank you very much.
From battlefields to home front, welcome to my tour of duty. This week's tour of duty hotspot is Auckland, on New Zealand's North Island. It's keeping alive the legacy of the country's Indigenous fighting men. And there's the hidden war of a famous Kiwi. Was he a hero? Yeah! Big freaking Mount Everest-sized hero! Plus, I don't want to blow my own trumpet. Well, bugle, but this roadshow item...
This is greater than the finding of the Titanic.
...is set to rewrite history. Like Australia, New Zealand came of age 100 years ago on the shores of Gallipoli. What this small Antipodean nation lacked in numbers, it made up for in support for king and empire during World War I and II. So I'm Auckland-bound, marching double time through some of its fascinating and surprising war history. I'm starting my journey at a gentle seaside village called Devonport, about a 10-minute ferry ride from the city. I'm jumping on board a gorgeous old girl who was an eyewitness to one of the most famous moments on Auckland's magnificent harbour.
Hiya.
Good morning, Tony. How are you?
Very well, thank you.
Good. Sean Harris, the engineer.
Sure.
Welcome to SS Pookie. I know it looks like puke, but it's actually a Maori word meaning a hill. Anyway, she's a beautiful little boat. She was built around about 1872, so she was already a middle-aged lady in 1913 when the biggest ship that most people around here had ever seen sailed into Auckland Harbour.
The patriotically named HMS New Zealand was in fact a British ship. In 1909, you Kiwis very generously presented the £2 million gift to us Brits. How did we pay you back? By sending her on a goodwill tour down under. Hurrah, we said, and so did New Zealand. During her 10-week visit, about 500,000 people, roughly half New Zealand's population, hopped on board for a sticky beak. So many people would come and look at it. The local reporters said it was like a hive swarming with bees or a hill covered in ants. When the Great War broke out in 1914, HMS New Zealand was right there in the firing line. And she was carrying an unusual lucky charm, which is now on display at Devonport's Torpedo Bay Naval Museum. So, Claire, the New Zealand's heading for colder, stormier climes and possible danger, but
It's carrying this. What is it?
So this is a piu-piu. It's a traditional Māori skirt, and it was gifted to HMS New Zealand's Captain Halsey, when it was in New Zealand in 1913.
Oh, this is the famous prophecy.
That's right. It was told by the Māori chief that presented it to him that if he wore it in battle, then the ship would be protected.
And it would fight 3 times and nobody would die.
That's right.
What was its first engagement?
So the first engagement was Heligoland, and Halsey put on the piu-piu there, and there was a bit of a story about their crew sort of saying, what's happening here?
Oh, yeah, I read that some of them couldn't get on with the jobs they were supposed to be doing, presumably because they were wetting themselves with hysteria.
Yeah, here he was in this full naval uniform with this piu-piu on. So, yes, he wore it then, and the ship came through fine.
The next attack was at Dogger Bank.
That's right.
Did the same thing happen?
Same thing happened. Halsey had the piu-piu on, and the crew all made sure that he had it on. They would pop up and say, oh, have you got it on, Captain?
They got less cynical by this time.
That's right. They were thinking there is actually maybe something in it.
But then there was a real blow because Halsey got promoted, so he wasn't captain anymore.
That's right, but he passed it on to the next captain, Captain Green, and Green took it off to the next battle, which was the Battle of Jutland.
Did it work?
It did. Battle of Jutland was quite a big battle, the next
Massive,
one.
Yeah.
That's right. And even though many British ships were sunk, the HMS Invincible and the Queen Mary, which was right in front of HMS New Zealand. HMS New Zealand was hit once, but there was no loss of life.
Just like in the prophecy. What was the damage?
One of the gun turrets was hit, and a large piece of armour came out. That's it.
This is the prophetic piece of damage. It was all that was done.
That's right.
I think we should all have one of these, don't you? Especially for motorway traffic.
Absolutely, yeah.
When Captain Halsey's daughter died in 2002, the piu-piu came back to its rightful home, New Zealand. Before you leave the Naval Museum, you have to look at this manky old storeroom, because it was exactly here at Christmas time 1917 that a handsome young German aristocrat by the name of Felix von Luckner was put in prison, just for one night. But I can imagine that as he paced the floor up and down, he must have thought about the remarkable life that he'd lived up until that time. He'd run away from home when he was 16. He'd worked as a lighthouse keeper's assistant. He was caught kissing the lighthouse keeper's daughter, as you do. He escaped on a horse. He went to Australia and hunted kangaroos. He worked for an Indian circus. Then the First World War broke out. He was injured at Jutland, and while he was lying on his hospital bed, he had a brilliant idea. He went to the German authorities and he said, I am going to make a ship, and it will look like a merchant ship, but really it will be a warship. And I will sail into the sea lanes of the Allies, and I will wreak havoc amongst them in areas where currently you cannot go. And the authorities said, yes, that is a good idea, but they said it in much better German accents than I can do. And he was so successful. For 225 days, he sailed through the Allied sea lanes and he captured 14 ships. But after 225 days, he was finally captured just outside Fiji, and he was brought near here to Auckland to a little island called Motahi. But Felix was lucky because the prison commandant had a soft spot for his charming German prisoner. So he really humoured him, and eventually Count Felix said, round about Christmas time, I wish to put on a show, a play that will amuse everybody. And the commandant said, oh, yes, that's a terribly good thing to do. And Felix said, and more than that, I will make all the properties. And he did. He and his men made all the props. They made this very German flag and pretended it was a prop for a show. But actually, all of these things were items that they might be able to use when they tried to escape. And some of the men worked in the workshops at Torpedo Bay, and they started making these pieces of metal, 11 of them in all. And when they put them together and they stole 2 screws in order to screw them together, they made a sextant. And in addition to that, they stole a school atlas in order to navigate by and brought everything back to the island. And when the time was ready, they created a big fire, and the commandant and all the guards rushed out to try and put it out. Meanwhile, Felix and his men stole the commandant's little boat, got all the stuff in it, hoisted the German flag and shot off, and they hid round the corner for about a week or so, till finally they pirated another boat and they sailed 700 miles away until they were finally captured. And it was then that Felix was dragged back here and stayed here the night. After that, he was taken off to Christchurch into a much more secure jail and spent the rest of the war there. But when he was asked why he escaped from the commandant's prison, he said, "Because he left the door open." Of course, like most rogues, Felix was prone to exaggeration.
This is Auckland's War Museum, which commemorates the lives of those who died in New Zealand's wars, including, of course, the contribution made by the Maori people. But when the First World War was declared, the Maori had a big dilemma. On the one hand, a treaty had been signed which gave them full British rights, so a lot of them felt that it was their duty to fight on the British side. But on the other hand, there were some who said, look, the British have taken away all our land. We're not going to fight for them until they give it back. And this problem was made worse by the fact that there were a lot of people in government who were suspicious of Maori fighters, who they thought would be ill-disciplined, and there'd be integration problems. And it was only when Gallipoli happened that people began to realise quite how brave the Maori could be. By the end of the First World War, over 1,000 of the 2,500 who had fought were either dead or injured.
3 decades later, the Second World War Maori soldiers displayed that same ferocity and courage. But one of them became famous and infamous at the same time. To find out more about Charlie Shelford, I've come to his old marae, or communal meeting house, in suburban Auckland. And that means a formal welcome. Apparently, this impressive young chap with the protruding tongue is challenging me to see if I'm friend or foe.
Do I pick it up?
Yeah, pick it up.
Okay.
Stand up.
Well, this wimpy Pom is going to accept his olive branch of peace. I definitely don't want to punch up with his mates. Where was I before I was so beautifully interrupted? Oh yes, Charlie Shelford from the 28th Maori Battalion. Joe, your granddad Charlie was one of New Zealand's great Maori heroes. I know there was a time when he captured 40 soldiers single-handed. How on earth did he do that?
The whole platoon was pinned down in a horseshoe escarpment on the side of a hill, and he volunteered to take them out. Now, he was using a German gun because the weapons that were issued from the New Zealand Army were only pea shooters compared to the German equipment. And it wasn't until he was 20 metres up to the trench where all these men were that the butt of the machine gun blew up. So he couldn't use the machine gun, so he had to throw that away. And he only had a Mills bomb left. So he threw the Mills bomb into the trench, and out come these men.
With their hands up?
With their hands up, and they surrendered.
So he saved loads of guys on his own
He saved his whole platoon.
Yeah. Charlie was recommended for a VC, but there was a problem. This demon on the battlefield was a devil off it, sneaking away behind enemy lines on looting raids, once even donning a woman's dress.
His superior officers were looking through binoculars and they could see him. And they were going, this guy looks pretty familiar.
Even if he is in drag.
Yeah. And then they really had a good look, and it was Charlie Shelford, you know. He had a pram and he had his army gears in the pram and the things that he looted. He had it in his pram. And, yeah.
Looking like a mad woman pushing a trolley. So, no VC for Charlie. Unfortunately, the DCM he did receive featured some very undistinguished conduct.
When he got his Distinguished Conduct Medal, he was in jail. They had to get him out of jail to get his Distinguished Conduct Medal. General Freyberg saw him in the parade and said, get that guy's handcuffs off him and give him a cap for his head. And my grandfather had a gripe against one of the military police. And he turned around, smacked the military police over in front of everyone, including General Freyberg.
So he just decked him while he was in the middle of receiving his medal?
He got his medal, saluted, and then they took him back to the jail.
How do you think the other soldiers viewed him?
Well, the other soldiers, when they talk about Charlie Shelford, they all say that he should have got the VC.
Are you proud to be his grandson?
I'm very proud to be his grandson, you know. He left a big legacy, you know, behind.
Merry battalion,
march to victory. Merry battalion, staunch and free.
That legacy and the 28th Maori Battalion's rich history is being kept alive today here at the Murray.
From the people with you, and we'll march to the enemy, and we'll fight right to the end, for God, for King, and for country. Oh, ake kia kae. Kia ora.
Kia ora, kia ora. My ignorance of the contribution that you made in 2 world wars is shamefully large, and I know that for the majority of my people back in England, they simply don't know about the sacrifices that you all made, both, of course, for your own pride and dignity, but for a country thousands of miles away. And I think it's important that your stories are heard. So let's hope that our television programme will do you proud, and thank you very much. Thank you. I'm in Auckland exploring its rich contribution to New Zealand's war history over the last 100 years. And if my childhood memory is correct, the best place to learn about history is in school. The Sir Edmund Hillary Collegiate, just outside the city. When I was a little boy, there was only one mountain, as far as I knew, that nobody had climbed. A mountain so high that if you're tempted to climb it, you'd run out of oxygen or get eaten by a yeti or fall down a crevasse. And that mountain was, of course, Mount Everest. And then, in June 1953, on the very day of the coronation of Queen Elizabeth II, word came through that finally it had, in fact, been climbed by a local Sherpa, known at the time as Tiger Tensing, and by a New Zealander, Edmund Hillary, who immediately became, for me at least anyway, the most heroic, the most famous man in the entire world. Hillary's transplanted former house is now the college's leadership centre. But I want to tell one of those leadership groups about the Hillary of a decade before Everest. Hi, guys.
Hello.
Sir Edmund Hillary, right?
Yes.
Yeah, the great hero?
Yes.
In the Second World War, his brother, Rexford, wasn't considered a great hero at all. He was thought of as a coward. The reason is this. In the Second World War, every young New Zealand man had to fight. There was no getting away from it. But there were a small group of people who loathed war. They thought war was a waste. They thought it was disgusting. They were called pacifists or conscientious objectors. And they wouldn't go to war even though it meant being on the receiving end of a massive fine and ending up in prison for the whole run of the war. And Edmund Hillary and his brother, they were both pacifists, both conscientious objectors, because their dad was too. Their dad had fought in the First World War at Gallipoli. That was so bloody. So many New Zealanders died. It was such a waste in many ways that he thought, right, I will never fight again, and I'm going to persuade my sons not to fight either. So when the Second World War came, did that mean that your great hero spent the whole war banged up in nick? No, it does not, because there were another group of people who didn't have to fight. The Hillarys were part of the so-called protected industries, which included manufacturing, agriculture, utilities and so on. Their successful beekeeping business provided vital honey, so they were allowed one family exemption. Edmund, the older son. So he worked the family business and his brother Rexford went to prison. But then in 1944, Edmund Hillary decided that he would fight, and he spent the rest of the war being a navigator on flying boats, while his brother stayed in prison. And when the war was over, Hillary went climbing up the mountains, big hero, big deal. His brother Rexford not only stayed in prison till the end of the war, it was another year after that before the New Zealand government let him out. And no one thought of him as a hero. But when you think about it, which of the two of them was more heroic? The one who climbed to the top of a mountain, or the one who, for his beliefs, was prepared to stay in prison all that time? What do you think of people who refuse to fight?
From my own perspective,
Yeah.
They are cowards. Seriously. I think it's good to fight for your country.
Is there anybody here who would be prepared to go to prison rather than fight?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, I'm half and half.
What do you mean half-half?
I'm on two ways. One is that I would like to fight for my country and serve my country, because there's no other New Zealand in this world. And once you have no more New Zealand, then there's no home for me. But also, on the other hand, if I do go, I would miss my family. And also, if I come back within a box, it would be heartbreaking for my mum, because I am the youngest.
So the debate goes on. Do you still think Edmund Hillary is a hero?
Yes!
Was he a big hero?
Yes!
Big freaking Mount Everest-sized hero?
Yes!
Then tell me one more time. He was... Yes! By 1942, the great and the good of the city were getting very worried that the Japanese were about to invade, so they put in motion a plan to hide everything of value. Old books were put in basements, the museum's greenstone collection went to a private house, the insect collection was spirited away, the National Library and the City Archive were sent to Masterton, which wasn't actually a very good idea because a couple of months later, Masterton had a terrible earthquake and all the books and stuff were left dangling from the shelves. But it must have seemed as though the whole place had been completely gutted, except what were they going to do with the stuff that was too heavy to carry? Take this statue of John Logan Campbell, the father of Auckland, one of the very first European settlers. He built the first European house and the first shop and became a successful banker. And when he was in his 80s, they made him the mayor. What an icon. No one was going to nick his statue. So what did they do? They yanked it off its pedestal, dug a big hole and hid it down there in the grass. Would that have fooled the Japanese? We'll never know, because they didn't actually invade. David, were the city fathers justified in being so frightened of the idea that the Japanese might invade imminently?
Well, I think they were justified in panicking. In that early stage after Pearl Harbor, it appeared as if the Japanese were unstoppable, especially after the fall of Singapore. New Zealand armies in North Africa. New Zealand's very much by itself, and the panic was quite real, and some of the stuff they did was quite sensible. Burying statues may not be one of these sensible things. Burying John Logan Campbell is, it's sort of fetishistic almost, you know, he is the symbol of the city, let's hide him.
Did they damage the old man?
No, they were a bit worried actually towards the end of the war because the Brits had damaged some of the stuff that they'd buried, but when they dug him up, he was fine, back on his pedestal.
Well, that's a relief, isn't it?
Absolutely.
For him, anyway.
For sure.
Cheers, Dave.
Thank you.
While we're talking statues, there's one deserving Kiwi who performed extraordinary deeds in London during World War II. Keith Park? No. So I figure New Zealand must have put him on a pedestal somewhere around here. No. No. Time for two of my favourite things, a cuppa and a crusade. Can I join you?
Sure.
Thanks. You know, I've been wandering around Auckland all morning and I haven't seen one statue to Keith Park. There's silence. Do you not know who Keith Park is?
No.
I find that extraordinary because for me, as an Englishman, he is probably the most influential New Zealander there's ever been because more than anyone else, he helped us win the Battle of Britain. And you haven't heard of him. Keith Park began World War I as a gunner in the New Zealand artillery and finished it as a flying ace with multiple kills and a military cross. He shot down 4 planes, German planes, in one day. And he was very influenced by, you know, the Red Baron, Baron von Richthofen, and his flying circus. Well, why they operated so well was they were very courageous. They operated in small groups, and they would just attack, 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 attack. And Keith Park said, that's what we've got to do. Go head on at the enemy coming towards us. It's what he called squirting in the front window. Not possibly the most attractive phrase in the world, but was very effective. So by the time the Second World War came, he was a senior officer and he was in charge of what they called 11 Group, who were the fighter pilots whose job was to protect London and the southeast. And all those lessons that he'd learned in the First World War, he now used in the Second. He was very hands-on. He hated being in the office, what he called flying the mahogany bomber. He'd much rather be out there himself and still loved this idea of small units of planes, maybe as few as 4 at a time, going up there, attacking the Germans, highly trained guys, being very brave, and then coming down again. This went directly against the top brass's big wing theory of getting huge numbers of planes in the air. On September the 7th, 1940, the German Luftwaffe launched the infamous London Blitz. As the city blazed under wave after wave of enemy raids, Parks's radical theory was put to the test. One of the most important days of the entire war for the British was the 15th of September 1940, which also happened to be Mrs. Park's birthday. And that morning, Keith comes down to breakfast and says, "Oh, sorry, I've forgotten your birthday." And apparently his wife, Doll as she was known, said, "Never mind, darling, a good bag of German aircraft would be an excellent present." And she got her wish, because on that day, the Germans launched their biggest ever airborne assault on London. 11 Group were magnificent and shot down 61 German planes. Winston Churchill had a huge amount of respect for him. Douglas Bader, the legless flying ace, was an enormous fan, and Air Marshal Tedder said if any one man won the Battle of Britain, he did. And yet there's not one single statue of him here, and none of you had heard of him. It's extraordinary. Anyway, nice to meet you all. Be warned, Auckland. Next time I'm back, I'll be looking for a certain statue. Know what I mean? This is my first trip to Auckland, and like so many visitors, I've fallen in love with its beautiful harbour. I mean, what's not to love? Well, maybe the fact that in World War II, New Zealand scientists wanted to turn calm blue waters just like these into a weapon of mass destruction. Hello, ladies. I have here a secret document from the Second World War, which is essentially a plan of how the New Zealand military were going to create a huge bomb in order to wipe out the Japanese defences. Newly discovered archive documents prove this floating weapon was real and shockingly powerful. Towards the end of the war, nearly 4,000 separate tests were carried out on the device. Recent natural disasters suggest it could have devastated entire coastlines. There really were boffins developing this thing, and this is Ray, the man who found it. How did you discover all this stuff?
Well, it was quite by chance. I was doing some work at Archives New Zealand and I came across a stack of books on an archivist's desk, and it was like a stack of telephone books, and they were called Operation Seal. This was the title of the book, and it meant nothing to me. And I just said to somebody, what's Operation Seal? And they said, that's the tsunami bomb.
The tsunami bomb? Had you ever heard of the tsunami bomb?
Never.
Or Operation Seal? What was it exactly?
Well, it was an experiment to create a huge tidal surge, which we would call a tsunami. And the intention was to decimate Japanese coastal defences and possibly even cities. Operation Seal was working at a small isolated bay, secret bay, north of Auckland, from June of 1944 until the beginning of 1945. And over that time, they tried dozens of different permutations, little bombs and big bombs. Some of them were only a few grams. Some of them used hundreds of kilograms of explosives.
Did they get the maths right?
Well, they think they did. I mean, at the end of the day, they worked out that if they had an array of charges, between 8 and 10 charges, that were separated from one another, and they were at just the right depth beneath the surface, and they were 8 to 10 kilometres from the shore, that you could make a huge wave of about 10 to 12 metres high. But you needed about 2,000 tonnes of TNT to do it.
2,000 tonnes of explosives. So it wasn't a portable bomb?
It wasn't portable at all, no. But by the time they'd finished doing the experimentation, it was definitely seen, if it was going to work at all, it was definitely seen as a weapon of mass destruction.
It's so odd to me, you know, because I think of New Zealand as being very anti-nuclear and very anti-weapons of mass destruction.
Well, that's exactly how we see ourselves. I mean, since 1987, we have banned nuclear-armed and powered ships from coming into our ports. And the very idea that little old New Zealand would be secretly trying to create our own weapon of mass destruction, I mean, that would be a huge surprise to most Kiwis.
This is your guilty secret, ladies. Thanks a lot for sharing that with us. Enjoy the sun. And that's why I love history. Take a neglected pile of books, add an inquiring mind, and a little-known piece of New Zealand's war history comes to life. Auckland, I want to find more of that tomorrow when we take our Tour of Duty roadshow to the War Museum high on the hill in the Domain. Hey guys. 3 lattes and you're not supposed to see this. It's just me on the coffee run. This is what you're supposed to be looking at. It's 1 of the greatest urban views in the whole of the world, I think. That is the Auckland War Memorial Museum. You've got the city down here. This is where the Tour of Duty Roadshow is about to begin. Come and join us. Well, it's all happening here. I just need my military experts. Professor Peter Stanley from the Australian side of the ditch and homegrown Kiwi Dr. Damien Fenton. Where else would they be but deep in historical discourse in the museum? Time to get them out into the Auckland sunshine and get this show on the road. Hello. Joe, good to see you, mate. Wow. Oh, it's so lovely entering through a crowd and onto these steps. It's real show business, isn't it? In there are the names of thousands of young New Zealanders who died. And for the best part of 100 years, families have been coming here to seek closure and say goodbye to their loved ones. During the course of the last week, we've been chasing the stories of some of Auckland's war heroes. But now this is the part of the show I really love, when you come to us with your stories and your memorabilia, because after all, history is our lives and our ancestors' lives. So that's what I want to hear now. That's what hopefully you'll show us now. I'm going to stop talking and let's get on with the Tour of Duty Roadshow. High five, high five, high five. Got all his books with him today. Fantastic. Seen that? It's the right old state, isn't it? Paul, where did you find the bugle?
Under a house. I was doing some plumbing there about 50 years ago.
Intriguing, isn't it? It's got a load of stuff written on it. Peter, come and have a look.
Hey, Tony. Hey, Paul.
Yeah, Peter.
Yes.
What do you reckon of that?
Well, I know exactly what this is, because you see the inscriptions. Places on Gallipoli, Walker's Ridge, Quinn's Post, Pope's Hill. So this is a bugle that was used on Gallipoli. Now, I'm especially excited to hear this because 10 years ago I did a book called Quinn's Post, Anzac Gallipoli, which tells the New Zealand story of Quinn's Post as well.
He's plugging his book.
Absolutely. But you see here that this bugle was used at Quinn's Post. And somebody has carved these, has tapped these inscriptions into it.
So tell me what you think the story of this bugle is then.
The New Zealanders took over Quinn's Post in June 1915 and immediately went into two terrible raids. You might even have heard of them, the 4th of June and the 7th of June. They lost many casualties at Quinn's, but they held Quinn's Post against the Turks. Quinn's was the most dangerous place on Gallipoli. The lines were as close as from here to the museum front door. And there was a constant bomb and machine gun and rifle fight. And here's a relic of Aucklanders at Quinn's Post.
Ken, are you here for the reason I think you're here?
I think so.
There's a very intrigued-looking crowd. What have we got?
Hi, Tony. This is Charles MacDonald.
Hi, Charles.
And this material belongs to his grandfather, George, who was in the Tank Corps in the First World War.
This is from the First World War? Mm-hmm. It's in very good nick, isn't it? Can I hold it up?
Oh, you certainly can.
Wow. That's my sort of size, really, isn't it?
And there's a hat that goes with it.
Oh, you've got a little head compared with me. Most people have. And this is him?
That's right.
Did he have his own special tank?
Yes, he did. What's interesting about the tank is the tank suffered a lot of damage.
What was the battle?
It was the Battle of Cambrai.
What do we know about Cambrai?
Cambrai was the biggest tank battle of the First World War. It had the British used about 500 tanks, biggest mass tank attack of the war. a real first for history.
So the tank was damaged, and they decided that they would dig the tank to form part of the trenches, a safe part within the trenches.
Yeah. So was it lost after the war?
Well, it wasn't lost. It was known in the village that there was a tank in this field. And about 10 or 15 years ago, they started to look for the tank.
Why didn't they call in Time Team?
So they dug it up, and we've got some pictures here of the tank in the hole.
Yeah, you see that.
Yeah, amazing.
Oh, what was the tank's name, somebody asked over there?
The tank is called Deborah.
She looks like a Deborah, doesn't it? Not a Deb.
And there is a picture of the tank being lifted out of the hole.
Oh, look, there's Deborah dangling.
Actually, Tony, Charles, it's actually quite appropriate that this tank's called Deborah, because this is a Mark IV heavy tank. And at the time, the Mark IVs came in two different types, and they were known as a male or a female Mark IV. And a male Mark IV had a 6-pounder gun on the side, and the female had a machine gun. And as you can see, there's no barrel there. It's a machine gun. It would have been a Mark IV female called Deborah.
It's intriguing, isn't it? It's defined as female because it's carrying a machine gun. I won't make any comment on that. Look at this. Magnificent weather, stunning location. Perfect for our sparkling Auckland Tour of Duty roadshow. I'm starting inside the War Museum now, partly for a look around this lovely building, and mostly to see one of its more fragile pieces. Carol, excuse these gloves. This has got to be one of my favourite ever mementos of World War II. Talk me through it. That tin, what's that?
That tin was sent by the women of New Zealand with Christmas cake. This was their rations tin. These arrived on the boats as care parcels.
And your dad would have got one of these. Where was he serving?
Africa, Egypt, Italy.
But in a way, the interesting thing is not the box itself, it's what was in it. What were all these things for?
This is the trench art kit, the kit that the men used in the trenches to create things of beauty. When things got tough, this was their sanity call.
So your dad was just stuck in North Africa or Italy or wherever he was fighting, and when he got nothing to do, he'd create lovely little pieces of art.
Yes, he did.
So what are these various tools? Is that a whetstone?
That is a whetstone. That would have been used to flatten off objects, create, carve, probably to also sharpen his bayonet.
And files?
Needle files were the most important part of the carving process for him. He would draw, then he would carve.
What's this thing here?
Cigarette holder.
Oh, yeah, very sophisticated, that is. This little sequence really gives me an enormous amount of pleasure. First of all, you get a little block of aluminium, and here he's got a bit which he's worked, hasn't he? Got a hole in it and some curves. And finally, the thing itself, a little kiwi.
It's got damage. I think he got run over.
But it's lovely now, but it would have been even more beautiful then. But in a way, the end of the story is this, isn't it? He didn't actually carve this at all.
No, he didn't.
So who did?
That is my work. My dad taught me. He taught me to use natural products and create beautiful items.
What exactly is this?
That is a kowhai flower carved from the tip edge of a deer antler.
I'm sure your dad would be very proud of your skills.
I think my dad would be.
Thanks a lot.
One of the pleasures of coming to New Zealand is that I rediscover stories that I already know. And this is one of the best that I remember from my visits to New Zealand, because Elizabeth and Murray, you're connected to Lieutenant Colonel Edmund Bowler. And Bowler was a great figure at Anzac on Gallipoli. And you've brought along not just photographs, but also documents about Edmund Bowler. Tell me, Murray, who was Edmund Bowler?
My grandfather, first and foremost.
Mm-hmm. And what did he do at Gallipoli?
He was appointed beach commander, and after that, beach commandant.
So he's actually central to the running of the Anzac Corps headquarters on Gallipoli. And this satchel is full of letters that Edmund wrote from Gallipoli, But one of the most affecting is this letter, which he wrote just before the landing, not thinking that he might survive the battle to come. Elizabeth, would you like to read out a passage from Edmund's letter to his wife and children?
Yes, certainly. So, my darling wife, now as I stand on the possible brink of the hereafter, I wish you to know how much I love you and how I recognise your love for me. I know you will grieve if you hear that I have left you forever on this earth, and my heart goes out to you now in your sorrow. But take courage, my darling.
Isn't that beautiful?
It is beautiful.
And she gets that letter a few months later in New Zealand, in Gore in the South Island. And of course, he doesn't get killed on Gallipoli.
No.
He gets wounded, I think.
Yes.
But he comes back to her at the end of the war. Now, the job that Edmund does on Gallipoli is that he's the camp commandant for the Anzac headquarters. But because he's at the headquarters, he meets interesting people. So tell us the story of who's in the photograph.
These are members of the headquarters staff, and then grandfather Bowler is there. And this is Simpson with his donkey, Murphy. And that was taken, we think, on about the 15th of May. And of course, Simpson was killed on the 19th of May. When we first found this photo and sent it down to be published in the book about Murray's grandfather, we got a message saying this is greater than the finding of the Titanic because they had virtually no photos of Simpson and his donkey.
And your grandfather, Murray, is literally in the middle of that group.
Yes.
Absolutely.
And when he was the beach commander trying to evacuate thousands of wounded off the beaches, he was hugely proud of the New Zealand and Australian soldiers because he said that no matter how badly they were injured, they never cried out. You know, he was just so amazed at how wonderful they were.
Their stoicism. Yeah.
Gather around as tightly as you can, because this work is absolutely intriguing, isn't it, Pete?
It is, Tony. Look, I wanted you to see this because Bill literally walked in off the street with this extraordinary collection of unique historical documents. His father was a POW of the Japanese, a New Zealander captured by the Japanese, but he produced in captivity not just cartoons, but also these wonderful portraits.
You know, I think that is the only funny drawing I've ever seen of Japanese prisoners of war.
Well, this one, Tony, is trying to describe prisoners' first taste of hot Indonesian food with chilies, etc. And you can see some of them, they've got fire coming out their mouths, etc.
And fire coming out of other places.
Yes.
And what's this?
Well, this is a magazine in the camp called the Mulo Mannequin. But there's cartoons and jokes and stories and cartoons of the sorts of underwear that they're wearing. So this is early in captivity, but again, this is absolutely unique.
It's still so funny. I mean, when you think of the stories of the POWs in the Japanese camps, you don't think of them laughing, do you? Pimpernel, you can strut like a bird of paradise in Pimpernels. We'll do exciting things to your curves, darling. But these drawings are exquisite.
Yes. They are, and I've been fortunate to be able to track down some of the relatives of these drawings, and this one is of Frank Howell, who was in the RAF, and his daughter now has a copy of this drawing. Others I haven't been able to track down. This one is of Captain Ringer, who was the camp interpreter. He could speak Japanese, and contemporary accounts say that he suffered more beatings than anybody else in the camp. It'd be rather nice to be able to track down Ringer's relatives and send him a copy of the drawings.
Absolutely. Well, if anybody who's watching this programme knows of a Captain Ringer or was related to a Captain Ringer, then do get in touch with the television station and we'll try to get you in contact. They're so sensitive, aren't they? And these are all guys who were in prisoner of war.
Absolutely. And it all helps build the story because typical of Japanese prisoners of war, they said very little or nothing about their experiences.
Well, thank you for bringing this stuff in. I can't remember where we've been presented with something quite so valuable historically. Thanks for bringing us along.
My pleasure.
This is like a school photo of the oldest school children ever, isn't it? Sorry, is that offensive? I'm sorry. I don't know about you, but I've had absolutely a great time. Particularly, I suppose, I'd like to say thanks to the people in the museum for providing this environment, which it couldn't have been better, could it? But also the things that people brought. I loved that bugle that went to Gallipoli, and it's still tooting away its stuff. But more than anything else, what has stuck in my mind today has been the love of place that Kiwis have, the love of their country, the love of their town, and how that keeps coming back in so many of the stories. So I'm going to leave you with a quote. This is a quote, sorry, he's an Englishman, G.K. Chesterton, novelist. And what he said was, the true soldier doesn't fight because he hates what's in front of him, but because he loves what's behind him. And that seems to me so true of so many of the men that are remembered here. Thank you for having me, Auckland. Thank you. The year is 1940. And the young soldiers of Newcastle are eager to do their bit by shining their searchlights on the harbour over there to try and spot any enemy submarines which might be coming in to attack. Except the war's in Europe, not over here. Why should they bother? So instead, they spend a lot of their time shining their lights down there onto that beach to try and spot any canoodling couples doing whatever it is that canoodling couples do. But had they shone them with a bit more accuracy, then what happened a little later might have been rather different. I feel quite at home in Newcastle. It's a cosmopolitan city with a bustling harbour, and I reckon a tough, gritty soul. Nice piece of typical Newcastle heavy industry. But this industrial port and coal hub also has a rich vein of war stories to tap into. And I'm starting with what has to be the most unusual. Ladies, I wonder if you would mind helping me. I'm doing a series called Tony Robinson's Tour of Duty. It's essentially about stories in the First World War, and because it's about war, most of those stories, predictably, are about blokes. But I've got this brilliant story about a local woman from Newcastle called Maud Butler. Can I share that story with you? Yes. OK, right. This is the very first anniversary of Anzac Day, 25th of April, 1916. She was just 17 years old, and Maud has been busted. She's up in front of the beak, and the prosecutor says, "You are charged with wearing an army uniform when you're not allowed to wear an army uniform. Not only that, but it's the third time you've been caught in an army uniform," and indeed it was. And the first time it happened, actually, there's something over there that I can show you. Can you follow me down here? OK, I want you to imagine that we're still in 1916. I know we've got a 15th century boat here that would be more at home in Portugal or Spain, but nevertheless, for the sake of our fiction, we will say this is an early 20th century boat. Here's Maud. We've actually got a bloke here looking period costume. This is not rigged, is it?
No,
I've never seen you before. Can I borrow your hat? Yeah, sure. Thank you very much. OK, this is Maud, dressed as an army person 6 months before the trial. Here she comes. She climbs up on board the ship, and for 2 days she's there with the other soldiers, and no one seems to twig that she's a girl. She's sitting around playing cards on the second day when one of the officers becomes suspicious, pulls back the cloth and reveals she has inappropriate shoes on. And he said, "You are not allowed to continue in this craft unless you have a medical." Well, of course, the last thing that she wanted was a medical. She came clean. She said she was a woman. They were all very nice to her, and they put her on a passenger ship bound for Melbourne. But when she got to Melbourne, word had got round. She was suddenly a celebrity, and she was greeted by loads and loads of reporters asking her questions. And she said that she'd got onto the ship because she wanted to join her brother, who was fighting in Egypt, and she also wanted to join the Red Cross. And she said, "You will not stop me. I will get on a ship." And sure enough, a couple of months later, boom, there she is in uniform again. This time she's tried much harder. She's got proper boots on, I assume. And this time, the way she gets on board, would you two mind being really, really drunk? So that's it. Well, no, a whole load of guys. This is brilliant. Look. Do it for the camera a minute. There, that's it. This a whole load of sailors were trying to get on board, and so just... Yeah, OK, you can stop now. That's just over the top. Anyway, she joins them too, and they all stagger on board, so no one really notices that it's moored until the next morning. Once again, somebody tries to check the identification papers. Obviously, they're phony. She goes back to court again, and she's ticked off, which is why, the third time, she is made to promise that never, ever again will she wear an army uniform. And as far as I know, she never did. Here's your hat back. Nice to meet you all. Bye. Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye.
What astounds me about Maud's story is that a nation at war was so opposed to women taking on any role outside what was deemed appropriate. To some, this sort of patriotism was downright horrifying.
Up in Newcastle, there was apparently about 200 girls walking around in AIF uniform collecting money for Anzac Day. And when they were talking about that in the court case, the judge asked, "You mean they were wearing trousers?" Yes, they were wearing trousers. And this is kind of outrageous in those days for women to wear pants.
3 decades later, women were not only wearing pants, they were playing a vital role in male-dominated industries to overcome chronic labour shortages in World War II. Wouldn't Maud have loved that?
How did other women view her?
Well, she was very inspiring to young women at the time. There's lots of letters that come in to the newspapers after she's caught, both times, saying, "Maud really shows what we Australian girls can do." And she puts a lot of Australian men to shame. You know, she's really out there. We really like her a lot.
And so they should, I reckon.
Dominating the Newcastle skyline is this imposing structure, Christchurch Cathedral. Not surprisingly, it took more than a century to build. Now, a place of worship isn't where I'd usually come to explore war, but it's the treasure trove inside one of the smaller chapels that I'm here to see.
This is the Warrior Chapel, built for and by the people of Newcastle because, of course, you weren't allowed to repatriate your war dead after the First World War. And look at this. This, of course, is a Victoria Cross, but actually this one is pretty rare because most VCs are either in the ownership of the family or at the Australian War Memorial. But this one was donated specially to this cathedral, and it was given posthumously to a local young man called Clarence Jeffreys.
The 22-year-old captain won it at the First Battle of Passchendaele in 1917, leading an attack that captured 4 guns and 35 prisoners. Soon after, he was killed by machine gun fire. And for the many other Newcastle families who mourned the loss of their loved ones, there's an equally precious treasure.
It's called the Book of Gold, and it's a book of remembrance. And this gold comes from the jewellery of Newcastle women and melted down, and indeed the precious stones also from the women's jewellery. And inside, it's a book of remembrance which gives you the names of all the people from the Newcastle diocese who died in the First World War. What I love about it is it has this sense of respect and care and loss that so permeates this chapel and this cathedral. I was just about to leave here when I bumped into Stephen. Come over here, this is Stephen. Stephen is the dean of this place, and he said to me, "You haven't seen the best yet. We've got a find here which has only come into your possession fairly recently, and you want me to have a look at it?"
We're very excited because we found this last year, just a few months ago.
Where is
it's
it?
Out here. Come
okay.
on. Come with
and
me.
what is it? Right,
Let's bring it round here, Tony.
Okay. Can I take the lid off?
Well, just wait a minute. Do you know anything about General Birdwood?
Birdwood, he was a British general in the First World War.
The great thing, Tony, about General Birdwood is that the Australian troops adored him.
But how does all that relate to this box?
Well, I need to tell you about someone else. This is a lady called Dora Spark, whose brothers were fighting in the war, and Dora raised money to get a flag.
And is this the flag in here?
This is the flag.
Ah, now we're getting somewhere.
This is a flag, an Australian flag, which was unusual because it was a new flag, you remember. We hadn't had a flag for long. They gave it to General Birdwood to fly at his battalion headquarters, which he did. And it's well known as the Birdwood flag.
Let's have a look at it then, shall we? Ah!
Is that not the most amazing?
What's happened to it?
The flag was brought back, Tony, after the war and given back by General Birdwood to the people of Newcastle.
Yeah.
It was hung in the Warrior Chapel here at the cathedral, and the respectful thing you do with a flag that's been in battle is you leave it there to die gracefully. And that's what happened.
But instead of lovingly disposing of it, the then Dean collected up the pieces and secretly stored them in the church vault. But are you going to sew it back together again? I mean, look at all this. There's just thousands and thousands of little pieces.
The Conservators know how to do it. I have no idea what they will do, but they will create a massive flag again.
But, Stephen, the flag's a flag. What's so significant about this one?
This flag, Tony, was sent by citizens of the Hunter to watch over their boys at the front, and it was brought back. And a lot of those boys didn't come back, but the flag did. And so it was deeply honoured, and it carried, if you like, the blood and the memories with it. And here it is, it's still here. Makes me cry when I think about these things.
I can hear that.
Yeah, it is just so moving. And so we're wanting the world to know about it so that we can get some help.
Well, good luck with the fundraising.
Thank you, Tony.
And with the sewing.
Thank you. It's been a real pleasure having you.
Cheers. I'm just outside Newcastle now in a suburb called Mayfield East. And OK, this bit may not look particularly distinguished, but up to around about 16 years ago, this whole area, right from where I'm standing here, past all that forest land, through to the port there where all the storage silos and cranes are, that's about 2 kilometres away, would have been part of BHP Steelworks. It was absolutely massive. It was the largest integrated steelworks in the whole of the British Empire. And it was not only the heart and soul of Newcastle, it was vital to Australia's war effort over 2 world wars.
The steelworks of the Broken Hill Proprietary at Newcastle are the backbone of Australia's steel industry, which hastened the industrialisation of the nation in wartime. Steel for ships, steel for mechanical equipment, steel for motor cars, steel for bridges. Steel, which is the framework of Australia's increasing stature as a manufacturing nation.
The steel made on this site now went into parts for Owen guns and Bren guns and fighters and bombers. Here on site, they made machine tools, milling machines, gauges, jigs and grinders, and more than 50 ocean-going tugboats. It was a far cry from World War I, when its prime contribution had been steel for the railways which crossed war-torn Europe. It must have been a huge psychological jump to go from the kind of production they were doing in World War I to what happened in World War II.
Yeah, World War II, technology changed. It was so quick. There was so many things. And also, we were isolated. We had to make our own stuff. We weren't doing things for the mother country and sending them over. This was our war effort.
Do you think the people of Newcastle were proud of what was going on here?
Yeah, well, Newcastle was a major part of the Australian war effort, industrially, with the port and that kind of thing. We pretend we're kind of humble, but yeah, we were very proud of what we were doing.
But people throughout the country must have been very nervous about the possibility of the Japanese blowing this place up.
Oh, it wasn't just the Japanese who had plans to blow up this place. We had plans of our own.
Who's we?
The BHP.
Why would the BHP want to blow up their own steelworks?
Well, in case of invasion, it's not just a worry about people or land, it's also a worry about the war effort and what you can make. So if you raise the BHP, then the enemy can't use it. Come over here, I've got some original documents to show you.
Yeah.
So this is the BHP in 1942. And you can see we're right here now, huge plan. But you see the letters all over the BHP. These are part of the secret. Each letter is an area.
So what are these things here?
This is wire.
Yeah.
This is explosives wire that has gone all around these really crucial parts of BHP so you could blow it up.
Who was going to do the blowing up?
There were these guys called powder monkeys. These guys, their job was to place the explosives to the wire and blow the place sky high.
This is intriguing. Plant demolition time chart. What does that mean?
Well, see, this is the only proof we had. This was kind of gossip and conjecture. We found these original documents in the BHP archives down in Melbourne, and it shows the timeline of how long it takes you to bring the explosives and when you're going to blow it up, and what's the most important, how you blow it up within 15
hours. So hour 3, zone K gets blown up.
Zone K over here, so open hearth furnaces and the power.
Bang! And then it starts to go crazy. You've got explosions in hour 4, hour 6, hour 6, hour 6, hour 6, hour 6. That's going to be big. 7 more explosions, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 more. Just by the 15th hour, the whole place has gone up.
Yeah.
But listen, what I don't understand is this. See, this is what, a milling machine or something?
Yeah, it's a milling machine.
A milling machine, OK. This is so chunky, isn't it? It's really solid. Even that mayhem isn't going to wipe everything out, is it?
I know, and that's one of the things. I think what they could have done is made a whole lot of damage, taken a lot of time to get back up to production. They could have damaged things, but they probably wouldn't have blown it sky high to a flat ground.
So they deliberately weren't aiming for complete Armageddon, just to do enough damage not to be able to get the thing going again quickly?
I think they realistically knew they could only do enough damage, yeah.
But if I'd been a worker here, I would have been outraged at the idea of all my machines and my whole culture just going up like that.
Well, they didn't know.
What do you mean they didn't know?
Well, it was a secret. It was top secret. The only people who knew were high levels of government, high levels of BHP, and the powder monkeys.
And it kept being a secret after the war?
Yeah, there was gossip and you'd hear little bits and pieces, but there was no proof until we found those documents that I just showed you in the BHP archives in Melbourne.
So you found them?
Well, yeah, the Newcastle Museum was doing a whole lot of research for BHP, and we came across a box and went, oh, this proves it. This is the plant demolition time chart.
This is one of Australia's great war secrets, isn't it?
I quite like it, yes.
Well, thank you very much for sharing it with us.
Thank you.
Lovely to meet you.
Lovely
Bye.
to meet you.
Isn't it extraordinary that this massive works that took 25, 30 years to build up and was at the very heart of Newcastle could have been wiped out in just 15 or 16 hours? It wasn't long before not just BHP, but Newcastle itself was in very real danger.
Clear the range. Number 2-gun load. Like ready. Ready. Number 2-gun ready. Number 2-gun fire.
In June 1942, Japanese subs came across the Pacific and attacked Australia, most famously at Sydney Harbour, where they sunk HMAS Cuttable with the loss of 21 lives. But they also attacked Newcastle too, right here. It's thought that they were after the BHP steelworks over there and the Walsh Bay dockyard. To say that the whole thing was a bit of a failure is an understatement, particularly given that the Walsh Bay dockyard had been decommissioned many years previously. Nevertheless, a secret report reveals just how dangerous it could have been.
One shell landed on the BHP spares department, one shell adjacent to the benzol filling station, 3 shells landed adjacent to the wharf, In addition, we understand 3 shells landed in and around Parnell Place in the city.
I love that phrase, we understand that 3 shells landed in Parnell Place. This is Parnell Place. You can see how low those shells must have come in off the sea, and one of them landed right here. Well, if you'd been living here at that time, you wouldn't just have understood it, would you? You'd have flipping well known about it. Although there is a popular understanding that the Japanese didn't want so much to destroy loads of local infrastructure. What they were after was undermining people's morale. Although there was one Newcastle family who were most concerned that their special supplies weren't damaged.
So I'm heading out of the city to an unassuming suburban house in nearby Hamilton, because this is one Newcastle story you're not likely to find in the history books.
Hi, Doreen.
Oh, Tony, how are
sweetheart. Very well, nice to see you.
Oh, aye, that wasn't in the book.
Well, it is now. Your dad loved beer, didn't he?
Mm.
And he was making it on his own in the Second World War.
He made his own because he was a brewer for the pickle factory at Islington.
Yeah.
And he could get the yeast. You couldn't buy yeast in the country here. And when we had our backyard was all raised up with an air raid shelter underneath, Dad thought that's a great cellar. And he had it full of beer.
But he was also an air raid warden.
That's right. And the night that the Japanese landed,
yeah,
him and the next door neighbour were down looking after their beer, not worrying about the Japanese landing on our doorstep.
Why? What was the problem with the beer on that night?
With the bombing, it set all the beer off. It was all exploding everywhere.
What was the vibration, do you think?
Yes, there was a lot of beer down there, and we weren't going to get down there and get shot by the beer. We was going to stop up top and get shot by the Japanese or whoever was. We didn't know who was firing at us.
What happened when you went out into the street the next morning?
We weren't real sure what had happened because when we got in town and there was a big hole right in the front of Newcastle Hospital, the air raid warden came down in true Aussie style. He said, "Piss off, you kids." And we just went. And we didn't know what had happened. Just a big hole there. I mean, it wasn't as if we were expecting war. It just happened. And we were just all very curious. We'd never seen bombs or guns or anything like that. Even when it landed on our doorstep, we still didn't know what it was.
Well, thank you very much for telling me your story.
That's
I really
all right.
enjoyed
And
that.
you've still got warm hands, see?
Well, I have got warm hands, but a cold heart.
Oh, well, don't want you then. Buzz off.
See you, Doreen. I really enjoyed that. She's my kind of historian.
Newcastle was never attacked by the Japanese again, but it still wasn't safe. Soon after that raid, in true Dad's Army style, the city beat itself up in the most spectacular fashion.
Andrew, an extraordinary event occurred about a week after the Japanese attack when the people of Newcastle seemed to turn on each other. What happened?
Well, the searchlight up at Nobby's Lighthouse, the engineers swore they saw a conning tower and a periscope entering Newcastle Harbour.
Through that little gap there?
Right at the entrance there.
Yeah.
So they gave the command for the 3-pounder anti-torpedo gun to open up and start shooting at it on this side of the harbour.
Yeah.
As soon as they did that, the bullets started ricocheting over to Stockton where there was another 3-pounder gun.
So they started firing as well?
They started coming back, but before they could fire the big gun, they had to use a machine gun and shoot traces to see where they were shooting.
Yeah.
In the haste, they slipped off the mount and sprayed this whole area where we're standing now with machine gun fire. So all the soldiers over here had to hide in the trenches because bullets are flying everywhere. Eventually, when they fired their big gun, they were so excited, they had it on such a low depression that the bullets were hitting the harbour and flying up into the power station over there.
Did they damage the power station?
Well, right where those 3 towers are, blocks of flats, that's where the power station was. And yes, they did hit it. But that wasn't the end of the story. In their haste again to keep firing, they managed to blow up one of the power poles. So they lost their communication with the command, they lost their searchlight, they were off air for about 10 or 15 minutes.
It seems as though every step that happened confirmed that there was an attack happening and made it bigger.
It was just getting crazy, and everyone wanted to get involved. The RAAF had a crash boat in the harbour.
Who are they?
They're the Air Force, the Australian Air Force. So they sent this crash boat flying up the harbour to get involved. It was on the radio saying, "Cease fire, cease fire!" As it's coming up, it wanted to follow the searchlight beam to where they saw the submarine, and its idea was it was going to ram the submarine. The two gun batteries didn't reckon they didn't hear the ceasefire, so they kept firing. The RAF knew he was in trouble and got out of there.
Could they actually have seen a periscope or a conning tower or whatever?
No, it was totally impossible. The 3 midget submarines that attacked Sydney 2 weeks earlier, all destroyed in Sydney. The motherships, way too big to get into Newcastle Harbour submerged. They would have been on the surface and visible. Newcastle Harbour wasn't dredged till the early 80s to make it possible. So now we know it couldn't have happened. But I think everyone was covering their own backside, so they didn't get charged. So the Navy backed the Army up, the Army backed the Air Force up. So this myth just became, yes, we saw a submarine.
Did the authorities learn anything from this?
Well, I don't think they fired in anger again after that. And no one had to hide in Newcastle, that's for sure.
I think if we saw a sub coming into the harbour now, we'd duck, don't you?
Oh, well, I think the sub would be safe. I think we'd be in more danger standing here.
Thanks ever so much. That's a great story.
Thanks.
Cheers. It's funny, isn't it? No one wants to admit they made a mistake. All the forces get together and say, oh, no, it wasn't a cock-up after all. But I bet you, in each and every war, there are hundreds of incidents like that. It's just that you don't find out about them because they're covered up.
My tour of duty has taken me to the New South Wales industrial city of Newcastle. In 1942, it became one of the few places in Australia to experience firsthand the dark impact of war.
Bob!
But amid the falling bombs and the booby-trapped buildings, you can always find a lighter side to human conflict.
In most countries, if I was looking for a story, I'd go to the library or the bookshop. In Australia, I go to the pub. Or at least the pub as it was in the 1940s. Ladies and gentlemen, have you heard of Wally Prigg, the great local hero?
Wally Prigg, rugby league player, 20s and 30s?
That's all right, that's right, captained Australia.
Captain Australia, yeah.
But the most important thing from our point of view is that he used to drink here in the Bennett pub. What about Jack Beaver? Who's heard of Jack Beaver? No? That is exactly my point. He was just an ordinary bloke who also drank here. Second World War, Jack Beaver goes off to war. Wally doesn't because he's too old. And Jack writes home. Now, we all know about writing letters home from the front, don't we, to your wife or your sweetheart or whoever. But what do you do? What's your name?
Chris.
What do you do if, like Chris, you spend every hour of every day in the boozer, which is what Jack Beaver did? Well, then you write home to the pub. And Jack wrote home to the pub, care of Wally Prigg. And this, amazingly, the Newcastle Museum has got one letter that he wrote back, care of Wally Prigg. And look at those palms. They were all drawn by him in pen and ink. Isn't it lovely? We've got a transcript of the actual letter, which I think is incredibly funny. Well, mate, here I am at last. I presume you know that I'm in Malaya. We are camped in the jungle, and I mean jungle wall. The zoo, compared to this place, is a circus. Talk about mosquitoes. They carry a leg of malaria germs under one wing and an axe under the other. Isn't that lovely? Yeah, Chris, can you read that bit for me?
All right. The natives are very colourful with their turbans and bright robes. I've had a good deal of leave in Singapore and listen, Wal. If this isn't the toughest place on God's earth, then I'll stop speaking. You can buy sex here the same as you can buy peanuts at the local stadium.
You can go and get some peanuts if you like. Could you read a bit for me?
Yes.
Yeah, try that bit there.
The natives over here have a custom to pay for their burial. They invest their savings in gold teeth. Each time they smile, they flash a line of pure gold. If ever I get on the piss with one of them, you can bet £1 the bastard will wake up gummy.
I love that phrase, don't you? And finally, this one is my favourite of all. I met a Malayan damsel the other day who speaks English fluently, and she said that her boyfriend puts all he's got into rubber. If it comes off, they intend to get married. I told her it was rather amazing the number of young couples in Australia who invest in the same way. Boom, boom. The sad thing is, though, that 4 months after this letter was written, Singapore fell and Jack Beaver ended up in Changi prisoner of war camp and then onto the Burma Railway. Although we do know he survived because he gave evidence in the War Crimes Tribunal after the war. But apart from that, he's just disappeared into history. Apart from this lovely letter and his friendship with Wally Prigg. So shall we raise a glass to Jack Beaver?
Jack Beaver.
Jack Beaver.
Jack Beaver.
Well, I've visited all my Newcastle stories. Now it's time for some Newcastle stories to come to me. Hello.
So I want every man and most of their dogs to surprise me. I know there's still some great untold Newcastle war tales from home and abroad out there, and I know there's a great Newcastle location longing to open its doors to them.
That could be the perfect place for our roadshow.
Time to rally the troops.
Thank you very much. Hello, Newcastle. It's lovely to be here again. Newcastle is one of my favourite cities in Australia, and that's not just schmooze. I really love it. I love how friendly you are. I love how proud you are of your town. Elsewhere where I go in Australia, people say to me, welcome to Australia. People here always say to me, welcome to Newcastle, and have that little tinge of pride in their voices. I'm going to stop flapping my mouth up and down in a moment if you guys will start flapping yours and tell us more about your stories, show us a lot of your memorabilia so that the rest of Australia can understand quite what a fascinating and wonderful and diverse town Newcastle is. So let's get on with the roadshow. This is Billy Young. And Peter, although you've not met him before, you've known his story for a long time,
I have indeed. It's one of the great pleasures and honours of this series to be able to meet Billy Young and to introduce him to these people. Billy is one of the great survivors of Australia's Second World War. He's not just a survivor of the Sandakan prisoner of war camp, but he's a survivor of the Outram Road jail. And if you know anything about prisoners of the Japanese, they're two of the terrible ordeals suffered.
Billy, you were only 15 when you joined the army, weren't you? How did you manage to get in?
I was standing with a fella and he said, I'm going to join the army. And I said, you're not young, old enough. He said, yes. He said, if you go to a certain... And he told me where to go. He said, I'll let you through. So the next day I was a fully pledged member of the AIF. A couple of months later, I was a fully pledged prisoner of war with the Japanese. And we'd got the biggest thrashing that anyone would ever hope to get.
And so you escaped the Sandakan Death March, but you ended up in Outram Road prison.
Yes.
Tell us about Outram Road.
You'd go out to a group and you weren't allowed to talk. But the thing with the hive, it would be a hive of industry was talking, because you'd be talking deaf and dumb. We had signal blokes who could send messages as long as they could see one another by blinking their eyelids. So you'd be sending messages through all that, and you'd have a guard standing there watching, and he wouldn't be realising that this was going on. Whenever we used to have to say, my number was 510, go Akajugo, and you'd have to salute. Eh? Well, when you go Akajugo, and then you'd salute, and you'd go down like that. But you'd come out, you're such a hoary bastard.
So how did you while the time away when you were sitting there cross-legged for hour after hour in your prison cell?
Well, first of all, I was lucky enough to find on the floor where we used to exercise a little pencil. Someone had dropped a pencil.
Mm-hmm.
Now, one day when we were having a scaby bath, the Jap guard was there and he was writing in his notebook. When lo and behold, he saw coming down the passage an officer and he dropped his notebook. So I got out of my hip bath, and as I did, I clumsily trod on his notebook and I got 3 pages and I made this bunch of cards. And 8 of diamonds, 9 of diamonds, all that, just written plain, nothing's fancy. And all that time, they never ever found those little cards. And
What if they had found them, Billy?
I'd hate to think.
When the war ended and you went home, you started painting, didn't you?
Yes.
And this is a painting of that jail?
Yes, that's my first prison cell.
Billy, your paintings are a unique record of your time in Sandakan and Outram Road Jail. Did it help you to come to terms with that terrible experience?
Oh,
to paint to those?
yes. They helped me to take it as a part of life's challenge, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Peter, tell me what strikes you most about Billy's story.
Billy is a survivor. He survived one of the most terrible ordeals that any Australian has ever been confronted with, much worse than the convict system here in Newcastle in the colonial period. He underwent months and months of deprivation, hardship, brutality, and he's still telling us the story and he's still laughing about it. And to me, this man represents all that's best in the Australian military tradition. He's truly one of the great national treasures.
Let's give him a big hand.
Here, here.
You make me feel sorry for myself.
No, you never do.
This is Ian and Reg and their beautiful bugle. It belonged to your dad, didn't it?
Yes, sir. Now, Dad wanted to enlist, but...
This is in the First World War?
First World War. He said to the recruiting gentleman that he wanted to be a bugler. And they grabbed him because nobody wanted to be a bugler. Everybody wanted to carry a gun.
Do we know where he went in the war, Reg?
Yes, everywhere that he went, he engraved that bugle.
Oh, I can see, yeah. Gallipoli's there. Lone Pine, evacuation of Anzacs, December 1915. Reg, do you remember your dad playing that when you were a boy?
Yes, I do. We used to live at the junction, and Ian and I'd be out playing somewhere around the place. And when we heard Dad play the bugle, he'd go into the backyard, he'd give it a blow, and we knew it was time to get home quick, smart.
When was the last time that you heard this bugle being played?
Probably 1958.
1958? So you haven't heard it since then?
No. He was battling with emphysema.
Yeah. Stuart, can I borrow you just for one moment? Would you mind playing this bugle for Ian and Reg? They hadn't heard it played for, would you believe, over 50 years.
It'll be my pleasure.
Give them a little taster. There you are, gentlemen, in memory of your dad.
Thanks, Stuart.
Thank you very much.
Very good. Thank you.
I'm in one of my favourite towns, Newcastle, doing one of my favourite things, poking my nose into people's family history. War history, specifically. And I'm pleased to say this proud city hasn't let me down so far.
The other day we were up at Parnell Place and we were talking about the day when the Japanese shells came hurtling over. A dreadful day in Newcastle's history. But I never expected to see that? Is it what I think it is?
It's certainly what you think it is. This is one of the 26 high explosive shells that were fired at Newcastle.
On that same day?
On that day.
Yeah.
Only 3 exploded, one down in Parnell Place, as you stated.
Yeah.
The rest landed in the Hunter River, in BHP, never went off.
Where did this one come from?
This one came from the BHP. For years it was at the BHP at the bottom of the footsteps, and in 1985 the then General Manager, Frank Rigby, donated it to the fort because of the fort's association with the attack on Newcastle.
And what exactly is it? I know it's big and it's explode and kill you, but what is it?
It's a 5.5-inch shell. The fort's guns are 6-inch, so it's not that much different to our big guns. And imagine this coming off a submarine.
You guys at Fort Scratch, they always have to boast, don't they? Oh, well, we've got bigger guns than the Japanese, yeah. But it would have created mayhem.
Oh, certainly would have created mayhem.
So when we were up at Parnell Place looking at the explosion and the history, suddenly we bumped into Mark. You came sloping up to us, didn't you, in your hat? And you said there's still some shrapnel around from that great day, and you've brought it in.
Yep, got it right here, Tony.
And what's the significance for you about that piece of shrapnel?
That went through the old man's bed.
That went through your old man's bed?
Yeah.
That must have made him jump a bit, wasn't it?
The old granny just got him out just in time, otherwise I wouldn't be here. Yeah.
He'd got out of bed?
Well, my grandmother heard the air raid siren, stuck her head out, looked like the real deal, and wardens running everywhere, so she grabbed the old man off the bed, grabbed the other brother, run downstairs, and by the time they hit the bottom of the stairs, it exploded in the street. They found it the next day when a reporter came up to take photos.
So that's your house?
Yeah, and that's that afternoon.
So how old would your dad have been at this time?
9 years old.
So you wouldn't be here at all, would you?
Would not be, Tony.
If your grandma hadn't got your dad out of bed at that
I reckon
time.
luckiest kid at the time.
What a relief to Australia that it isn't it, Jim? I love that thing about social history, don't you? I mean, the Second World War is a long time ago, and yet still we've got this piece of shrapnel, and we've got Mark. Good on you, mate. Lovely story. Thank you for coming. Thank you.
Catherine, I'm looking at a photograph of the McMaster family of Adamstown near Newcastle.
Yep.
And I see a very handsome young man at the back there who I believe is Alan. Tell me about Alan.
He is my great-uncle.
Well, let's learn a bit of what we can about Alan's story. He's killed in France in 1917, but before he's killed, he sends all of these wonderful postcards to his family. Now, I have to say, this is a lovely collection of embroidered postcards, which were done by French and Belgian refugee women, all hand-sewn. And they'd make a franc or two off each of them, and soldiers would send them back to their families. And look what they say. My thoughts are at home, to my dear mother, from your loving son. I think the cards could say things that Alan couldn't say directly to his family, perhaps. Now, he gets killed in April 1917. I think this is the last postcard he sends. What does that say?
Yes, this is flowers from France, and I think it is, again, it's very sad because this was sent on the 29th of March, 1917, and he died on the 9th of April. He was shot. To all at home with best of love, hoping that this will find you all well. I wrote you a long letter the day before yesterday. Love to all from your loving son, brother, Alan.
Now,
kiss, 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 kiss.
To me, the poignant thing is that this postcard and the letter would have arrived probably after the notification that Alan's been killed.
Yes.
So they're getting letters from Alan, who's now dead.
Yes.
It's a very
and
poignant...
that must have happened so many times, and I think, you know, how many postcards there were sent home by young soldiers to families.
Alan is remembered in Newcastle still.
Yes.
Thanks, Catherine, for telling us this very poignant story.
Well, thank you for letting me.
This is Julie, who's Deputy Director of the museum, so it's because of her that we've been allowed to be here today. And I asked her what would be the one find that she's got in the museum which she would want to share with us. What is it that you got for us, Julie?
I have this rather strange collection. These are the last remains of a guy called Driver Jack Grothin. 26-year-old, single guy, lives in the Junction with his widowed mum. He's a labourer, and off he goes to the Western Front to fight.
This is World War One.
World War One.
Yeah.
Yep. Jack Grothin is killed by a shrapnel wound to the abdomen in September 1917. And this is what was in his pockets when he died. And you can see the shrapnel to the cigarette case and to the match case and to his Bible. And out of all the things that I have here, and I have 11,000 objects, these are the things that always make me cry, and I feel some sort of personal connection to this man that I didn't know, but through his objects, you can see what he went through.
What is it that is so touching to you about his story, though?
I think the special part of it is it's so Newcastle. When Jack's objects were sent home to his mum, she was so upset. And you can imagine if you're a widowed woman and your son is away at war and this arrives on your doorstep from the army, she was shattered. So she put them in the wall of her house and sealed them up. And then she talked about Jack as though he was still alive. So he, it was almost like he lived in Belgium and he just was away for a while. And then we didn't discover the objects until the earthquake. So in the 1989 earthquake, the wall came down to the house and these objects came to light.
And it says here, this was the Bible of J. Grothin, killed in France on 21st of September 1918 at 7:10 p.m. So that's very late in the war, isn't it? Where he died of wounds. The shrapnel that killed his horse and wounded him. This Bible was in his pocket above his heart, and evidence of shrapnel can be seen on the cover. Well, that's about it from us. Thank you for all your stories and all your memorabilia. One thing that I've learned over the last few days is how important the defence of this coast and the city has always been to Australia. So I know you'll all be relieved that our youthful men-at-arms are still here guarding you against danger. And what more fitting way could there be to say goodbye to you than a military goodbye? Kai, can you come up here a minute? Kai, you actually play the bugle, don't you?
Yes, I do.
How long have you been playing it for?
For about 2 years.
And what are you going to play for us now?
I'm going to play the last post.
OK, well, I'll leave you to take it away. Thank you, Newcastle.